sitting on my doorstep, the people's passing by. They're coming back from getting wrecked. Everybody's high. Saturday night, what a bitch, laying on the lawn. The morning comes to bring the switch after the buzz is gone.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Addictions, the podcast about addictions. I'm your host, David Wagner. So we are finally back in action after a week off, which really gave me some time to get caught up on some things which I desperately needed to do. Anyways, on this episode of Addictions, we are talking about a few different news topics again. Episodes like this I kind of refer to as Addiction in the News episodes. So I guess this would be like Addiction in the News Part 3 or 4. This past week I found a few headlines and articles talking about various topics related to addiction and recovery, and I thought I would share them with all of you. But before we dive right in, I want to let you all know about some future content that will be available on our Patreon page at patreon.com/addictions. That's patreon.com/addictions. As some of you know, although I am in recovery from addiction, I actually have an underlying PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder problem, along with generalized anxiety disorder. Long story short, I witnessed my father lose a couple of fingers at the farm where we work in an accident. And that has all just been incredibly tough for me. I mean, I've had a lot of issues with that. So I have recently started counseling to help me deal with these issues. I will be recording a separate set of episodes that are only going to be available on our Patreon page, where I kind of discuss how my counseling and my EMDR therapy for the post-traumatic stress disorder are going. So stay tuned to the Patreon page in the coming weeks for that. Also, don't forget to follow Addictions on your favorite social media platform. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/addictionspodcast, and on Twitter we are at addictionscast. Now, I think I have an Instagram account set up for the show also, but I have not been maintaining it like I probably should. So, I mean, you can follow the show on Instagram, but just don't expect too much. And as always, you can stay up to date on new episodes, help with addiction, and how to support the show at addictionspodcast.com. Now, enough screwing around. Let's get right into this thing. Our first topic is about the possible connections between gender and addiction. Now, this is an age-old debate, really, and oftentimes it's somewhat of a controversial topic, and that is the differences between men and women. Now, I'm not going to get into any sort of debate about equality and stuff like that, but rather the biological differences between men and women. Now, the simple fact is that men and women really are different in this respect. Anyways, this is all from an article that I was reading from ScienceDaily.com the other day about gender differences and the current opioid epidemic. If you are interested in any sort of science news, I highly recommend ScienceDaily.com. And no, they're not paying me to say that. I just use the website quite frequently and figured that I would pass that information on to you. But anyways, basically the article kind of explained how up until now, gender was really not taken into account when treating opioid dependence and addiction. In my opinion, it's probably a good idea to pay attention to the influence that gender differences can have on pain, opioid use, and addiction. Men and women are not identical, and studies have shown that for a variety of reasons, women often have a greater risk of developing an addiction or a physical dependence when it comes to opioids. And yet many, not all, but many substance abuse programs have been developed around treating men. Again, I want to underscore the fact that in many ways, men and women are equal. We are all human, and we all deserve to be treated as humans with respect and kindness. But again, from a biological standpoint, women and men differ in some very big ways, mainly in the types of hormones that our bodies produce, and this in itself is one of the reasons why studies like this have begun looking at the role that gender can play in addiction. As of recording this episode of the show, there's actually not a lot of information regarding the results of these types of studies available, but as time goes on, I'm planning on watching this topic closely, and I'll be sure to keep you all updated with the results. One thing that I find kind of odd is that with all of the awareness about the current opioid epidemic problem, you would think that by now doctors would really be feeling the pressure to stop over-prescribing opioids, and in many situations they are. But recent studies still show that opioids are still being overprescribed after certain surgeries. A new study from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, shows that even now there are some doctors overprescribing opioid painkillers after certain surgeries. The study actually showed that roughly 2/3 of patients who were prescribed an opioid painkiller like OxyContin after surgery did not take a single pill during their recovery from that surgery. The entire prescription went unused. Instead, these drugs often sit inside the patient's house just waiting to be used. In fact, we know from recent studies that only around 10% of patients actually disposed of leftover or unused opioid medications. I found this study to be quite interesting, and the big problem with unused opioids sitting in the medicine cabinet is that people will often save them up because of the simple fact that they are strong painkillers. The problem arises when a patient starts taking the medication every day in situations where it probably isn't even necessary in the first place. Now, the whole point is that the less of these types of medications we have just floating around the country, the better. Our next story also comes from ScienceDaily.com, and this is about a new receptor in the brain that scientists have recently discovered that may actually play a very huge role in the treatment of alcoholism. The receptor, dubbed GPR139, had previously no known function, but recently scientists found that by activating the GPR139 receptor, it could reduce excessive alcohol use and reduce the pain of alcohol withdrawal. This is all in the very early stages, and the study was conducted on lab rats. But this study is the first to show the effects of activating the GPR139 receptor, and will go on to encourage the investigation of this receptor as a possible drug target in the development of future medications for alcohol dependence. I have personally seen what alcoholism can do to people. And believe it or not, alcohol is probably the most deadly drug in existence. I've read that basically one person dies every 10 seconds because of an alcohol-related situation. It's just really mind-blowing. This next story is about something that we've talked about quite a bit in the past, and that is the benefits of exercise during addiction recovery. This time, though, we're going to take a look at the scientific evidence that supports this idea. Clearly, it is no secret that exercise can help relieve stress, boost your mood, and even improve other psychological issues. Regular exercise can even help you kick a habit. And there is some pretty interesting new research that provides insight into how this all actually works. Researchers from the Buffalo Research Institute on Addictions found that daily aerobic exercise altered dopamine signals in the brain in ways that could make drugs and alcohol less rewarding to the brain. As research has actually shown, exercise is a natural reward and releases endorphins in the brain, which in turn increase the amount of the feel-good chemical dopamine in the brain's reward pathways in ways that are very, very similar to how drugs and alcohol do the same thing. The idea is that daily exercise may bring a person enough of a reward feeling that eventually they will no longer seek it out by using drugs or alcohol. Now, on top of having drugs or alcohol sort of hijacking the dopamine system in the brain, people with addictions often have reduced functioning in the brain's frontal lobe area. This area of the brain is involved with decision-making and the ability to control cravings of certain substances. And it turns out that daily exercise actually increases the activity in these areas of the brain, which may also help people to avoid using drugs or alcohol. While the research study was very interesting, I cannot stress enough that exercise is great, but that it's only one tool that we can add to the toolbox. Exercise should be incorporated into an existing recovery program to create an even more comprehensive treatment. As many of us know, every little thing that we can add to our battle chest against addiction is going to help. We want the deck stacked in our favor as much as possible, and exercise is just another thing to add to that list. Okay, that is going to do it for this episode of Addictions. Again, if you want to read more about addiction in the news or just science news in general, check out ScienceDaily.com. And as always, I want to thank you all so much for listening to the show, and be sure to check out addictionspodcast.com for updates to the show and all kinds of other stuff. And if you listen to the show on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, shoot us a review if you get a chance. Reviews are really helpful in keeping the show easy to find for everyone, so thanks in advance. I also want to send out a really personalized special thank you to Lynn, who actually donated $25 to the show via PayPal. So thank you, Lynn. That really helps out. And if anyone else is interested in making a donation via PayPal, you can find the information to do so at addictionspodcast.com. Just click support the show at the top of the page. And thanks in advance. Be sure to tune in next week when we are finally going to be releasing the second part in our marijuana series. Thanks again for listening, and as always, never quit quitting.
You spent your money freely, then you smashed your only car. You aren't what you are really, you missed it by so damn far. Your head feels like it's in a blender, and you hate to see the dawn. Your stomach says return to sender after the buzz is gone. And Sundays you prayed to Uncle John, you poisoned yourself last night. Mary slapped your friend Tom, got in a hell of a fight. Monday comes and it's back to work. The week seems so damn long. The weekend's past, you're still a jerk after the buzz is gone.